Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Sorry for some technical difficulties. This is why you don't change things minutes before you present. But okay, here we go. So as I mentioned, I'm Ivan. I'm going to be talking about some incident responses that we do. But just a bit more about myself. I work for a company called Blue Vision. I have the title of Head of Innovation, Research and Development. It's a fancy title, means nothing really. We are a small company of like 10 people, so everyone does everything, so everyone gets a fancy title, moving on with life. So not great, but things I am more involved with is more with community building. So hence I'm one of the organizers for this event. So I like building communities and teaching people different things, and also like building up skills and capabilities. Hence, I'm quite involved with building up CTFs and stuff like that, and information sharing, also with Hex Coffee and HexCon. So this is more the things that I'm interested in doing. It's not really something I do in my day job. My day job tends to be a bit more consulting, but more incident response and monitoring stuff. But this talk, I'm going to talk about one of the features that us as a company do. So our company motto is officially called it's practical cybersecurity. Our boss is very adamant about we don't just want to give people advice, we want to make that advice practical, have some way that they can actually implement this. But as the company sort of started up, we came up with a far more accurate slogan for us. It's stumbling into success. So when we started up the company, we didn't plan to do any IR responses. It was sort of just something that we lucked ourselves into. We got involved with a couple of fairly large breaches, and because most of us that started off the company, we worked in research and also had some consulting activities, we got involved as consultants within those sessions. So we started building up a capability where we would act as incident response managers. So if a breach would happen, we would come in and help you manage the incident, help orchestrate things, help make sure that everything is actually working as planned. So this led one of my other colleagues, he likes referring to us as the Ghostbusters. So if something goes wrong, call us and we'll try and help you from there. Hence our many slogans, and we'll discuss some of them today, and sort of like why Ghostbusters. I fall far more into the stumbling into success. That's one I feel is more accurate for our company. So in this talk, I'll discuss a bit about like what is an incident. When is something actually classified as an incident as opposed to just something that is abnormal? Then I'll discuss some of the frameworks that's out there. So there's multiple frameworks out there that can help you guide your process of how you would deal with an incident. And depending on which ones you specifically follow, it might dictate where you have more emphasis within your process or within your framework. Then I'll discuss 3 case studies. I made a bad choice of judgment this morning. I decided to swap out one of the case studies for a new one this morning. So those slides will probably be quite error prone, but hopefully they're interesting. And I made pretty sure that there's no sensitive information in there. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Then we'll discuss some of the common pitfalls. So where something that we see often goes wrong. So some of the information or some of the common trends that we see of what goes wrong during incident response. I'll be discussing that. Then for individuals that want to get into this field, I'll be discussing some of the tools and what training is available, what resources there are for you. And then from an organization standpoint, if you want to build out your own IR team, what is possible tactics that you could use to try and build up that team? And then I'll discuss just some actionable steps you can do, because that's a good way to end the talk. It's like, hey, now go do something. So yeah, so that's basically the outline of my talk. So let's first start off by clarifying terms, because that's how all presentations go. You go with a glossary and you explain words. So first off, so usually when we talk about an incident, we know this because of events that we monitor. So an event can be anything. It can be someone logging into a system, someone switching off a machine, someone starting up a script, someone installing new software. This is just something that is a loggable activity, something that you can associate someone actioning an item, what it was actioned on, what the result of that was, and at what time this was done. Then you get alerts. So alert is not necessarily a malicious thing. It's just something that is outside the operational norms. So it could be someone logging in from a PC that they don't usually log in from. It could be someone, so it can be basically, there's many things it could be, but it's not necessarily that's malicious. It's just something that is outside of the norm. When you start getting into things that start breaking your confidentiality, integrity, and availability, your CIA triad, then you get more into the concept of it being an incident. So we like to classify incidents as lowercase incidents. So these are smaller things that it usually affects one user. It's a quick correctable thing. And then you get incidents that is, cool, we need to call a war room. We need to get all the people in, get all the vendors in. Now it's time. You cancel all your plans. Your next couple of weeks, or hopefully only days, will be dedicated to this incident, trying to recover this. Incident usually impacts the business processes itself. So it will have a business impact. Usually the lowercase incidents, they tend to be smaller things. An example of such a thing might be someone forwarding an attachment to someone they're not supposed to. This might lead to unintended data disclosure. It's something that is a quick correctable thing. It's something, if you catch it quick enough, you can correct it. It's not necessarily a, depending on the data, obviously it got leaked. It's a correctable action and could be easily fixed with training. You don't necessarily need to deploy a full IR team and EDR systems and go all hog wild and crazy. So when it comes to frameworks, the two most popular frameworks for this is either you go the NIST route or you go the SANS route. So us as a company, we are CREST accredited to provide IR services. And as such, we sort of more lean towards NIST. So NIST, it focuses far heavier on the policies, documentation processes. It's more governance orientated. So for corporate companies or for governmental organizations, which we as a company deal a lot with, they tend to prefer the NIST standards versus SANS, which is far more practical in my opinion. It's far more about what tools you use, how do you use those tools, what capabilities it is. Even the training is far more hands-on, I would say. But if you look at the processes or the steps they define when dealing with an incident, for the most part, there's significant overlap. And this is true if you look at both frameworks. Both frameworks have very similar steps. They might just vary in what they focus on. And also, some of their terminology is similar, but not exactly the same. So, for example, during the NIST, the second stage of NIST is the detection and analysis, whereas as in SANS, it's mostly just the identification. So, NIST, during the analysis part, there you might include things such as reverse engineering malware. There's a bit more things so that you have better decision support when you come to the point where you do the containment, eradication, and recovery. You'll see that both of them have those 3 steps because those are sort of where you start doing actions. The first 2 steps is far more about gaining more information so that you can know you have proper decision support. So that you know when you switch off a server, is it the right thing to do? Is this what is the root cause of the attack? So a lot of your pre-steps is more with giving you enough information so you can have an informed decision when you actually do your action steps. And then the one thing that's very important, most people forget about in IR, is the post-incident. So what is the lessons learned? What is the post-incident activities? What should you do after the fact? So because our company is more NIST focused, I'm going to go through each of these in a bit more detail according to the NIST one, but keep in mind, fairly similar for the SANS, just slightly different focus within those. So preparation phase. So this is usually when you start making your plans and how you plan to act on certain incidences. I say plan because there's a famous quote by Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So that's the thing, is you have a plan, it's well documented, it's exactly according to your corporate document structure, it's been approved by several auditors, happinesses. Now something actually happens. None of that actually works, or it doesn't work as you intended, or it's too specific, or it's too vague. That's the thing, is you oftentimes run into this type of problem where your plan doesn't actually meet reality. But it is important to have a plan. So again, Benjamin Franklin has the other quote of this. So failing to plan is preparing to fail. So you need to plan, but you also need to be quite cognizant that this plan might need to be tweaked at a moment's notice when the actual incident happens. So from our perspective, because we provide incident response as a managed service for people, we oftentimes don't own the infrastructure, we don't make the plans. We do sometimes consult in plans that are being made, but usually by the time we get called, something already went wrong, and we get the response plans and what steps the company usually does, hand it to us and say, okay, cool, what is your response policy? I say usually because oftentimes the policy, the company just says, oh, we never expected this type of attack to happen to us. If you're not prepared for it, one of the most important things usually within these plans is clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Because as the previous speaker mentioned, oftentimes in cybersecurity there's the bystander effect. Everyone knows something happened, everyone knows something must be done about it, but unless you have clearly defined, oh, okay, something happened on the firewall, you go sign these things. Oh, we need to have someone investigate the EDR logs, you go do those things, report back. You need to have clearly defined roles and responsibilities, who's going to do it, and to whom they should report those findings to. And that brings us also to the point of communication channels. So communication channels, most companies say, oh no, we just use Teams for a communication channel. That works well until your Teams gets compromised. You need to have backups of communication channels. We had one instance where during the investigation we realized that one of the users that was in our War Room Teams channel, his Teams account got compromised. So that person, we could never verify this for sure, but the attacker theoretically could have access directly to the Teams screen. He could see the communications coming in as we were trying to stop him progress further within the network. So hence, you can't rely on a communication channel that might be compromised during the attack. So have alternative communication channels. And also with regards to that, we've had cases where the entire HR portal gets taken down. So if you said, okay, I usually contact this guy via Teams, I now need to get hold of him midnight on his cell phone, nobody has his number. You need to have that in writing somewhere that isn't tied to your infrastructure. You need to have it somewhere that is easily accessible, easily pull-upable, that if your infrastructure goes down, you can still actually reach the people that need to be notified. So also usually when we start our IR process, we try and find out from the client, cool, what infrastructure, or what security infrastructure, what security tooling do you have? As the previous speaker mentioned as well, there's hundreds of security vendors, different EDR solutions, different firewall solutions. We then try and figure out, with the mixture of solutions we have, what can we use to try and narrow down what happened? What logging is available? Is that logging centralized? How can we gain access to it? Is there any vendor support for if we need custom scripts to be deployed or if we need custom analysis to be done? Who's the vendor contact for those type of things? So also what we, as a retainer service, we provide sort of training through attack simulations. So again, you don't want your first incident or first actual attack to be the first time that you run through this process. So you want to pre-attack, run through a couple of scenarios, you have an idea of what is to be expected during one of these incidents. So there's a QR code for those that need it for the scavenger hunt, so just if you need it. Yeah, so the next phase is the detection and analysis phase, right? So this is usually where we look through the logs if they are available. So oftentimes, depending on where your logs are stored, your logs might be also encrypted due to ransomware, but we try and see what is there that we can start building out, fleshing out a picture of what happened during this incident. This could be, as I mentioned, SIM logs. It could be alerts from users. Sometimes it might be someone sending out a support ticket saying, hi, I no longer have access to the system, or this is acting slower than usual. These are all indicators that we can maybe use to try and figure out where stuff started going wrong. We can also then compare that to common indicators of compromise that is associated with certain threat actors. Yeah, so this is where we start gathering evidence and start defining okay, we now suspect there's an attack. What type of attack is it? Is it the only attack that happens? Because another thing that happens oftentimes with response planning, you assume you'd only be attacked in one way at one time. But you might have a phishing attack that leads to a ransomware attack that might lead to credential disclosure. It doesn't mean that you just have one attack at any given time. And then it becomes quite important to know, how do you prioritize this? What is the thing that is most sensitive to your business? What is the crown jewels? What is the thing that will bring your organization down? Because that is the thing that will need to be addressed first. It is important to also address the other things, but you need to, with the information, know already what would be the greatest impact. Okay. So then we get to the containment, eradication, and recovery phase. So there's several things when considering how do you contain an infection. So this might be isolating a device off a network, taking it off a network. For forensic purposes, you'd most likely not want to switch it off. Depending on whether you want to live track the attacker as he's going through a network, you might not want to completely sever their internet connection, but you want to limit their connection to the rest of your network. Several EDR systems have capabilities to sort of sandbox out a specific user, and they can still access the internet and think that they are fully working, but you can sort of limit their exposure to the rest of your network so that they can't spread or gain lateral movement. Yeah. And then with regards to eradication, this can be anything from patching the vulnerability, removing access accounts, trying to get the threat actor out of your environment. This is important because if you want to recover your data, you don't want to start recovering your data while the threat actor is still in there, because then you're just going to get breached again, and you're just going to get encrypted again. And then it comes to the recovery process. So you need to have a way that you can, in a secure environment, rebuild environments that have been compromised beyond the point of recovery, or well, just fixing the issue. So hence you need to have mechanism in place. So this is where your data recovery plans comes into play. And it's also important to validate these steps. We've oftentimes heard people, yeah, we've got a backup plan. We haven't tested it in 10 years, but in theory it works. We've got backup tapes, but we've got nothing that can read the tapes that we've backed up on. We had one case where the client had to wait over a year to get the correct read head so they can read from the backup tapes that they've created. Yes, it's backed up, but they can't get the data off because they only ever wrote data to it. Yeah. So those are the type of things you need to practice for and train for. And then when the post-incident happens, so this is where you've now stopped the bleeding. You've now made sure that the critical servers are back online. They've been recovered. You've made sure that they haven't been compromised after recovery again. Now you need to decide what is the lessons you learned. Where did the security fail? What went wrong? Try and identify what was the root cause of the problem. And this is oftentimes where you get the blame game problem, where people say, oh, it's this guy's fault. Let's get HR involved and pin it on this guy. Once you start playing this blame game, you get far less responses, far less accurate responses from users to say, what did they do? Did they accidentally click a link? It's human to make mistakes. But if them hiding a mistake that they made and you having to spend several hours to find that mistake, and then the attacker had so much extra time actually in your environment, is far more costly than him just being able to own up to the mistake and without fear of repercussion. Okay. Then there's also the problem of now you need to also responsibly disclose the specific breach and how that happened. There's certain steps, and usually you would need someone that is fairly well trained in media relations to actually relay what was being breached without giving out too much corporate information, without leading to further reputational damage to your organization. This specific step, so usually the post-incident activities, they get overlooked because most organizations, once the bleeding stops, they go, okay, cool, you're patched up, go on. That's also the time period when a lot of the security funding just suddenly dries up. During a breach, you've got all the funding in the world. You can deploy whatever security tool you want. Once the bleeding stops, like, okay, now we think things are fine now. We're not going to deploy these extra tools. So yeah, and it's also important to check that those activities that you've now deployed to try and stem the bleeding and stem the attack, is it still working that way in a month from now, 2 months from now? Is those extra security controls that you've now made specifically for this task, is it actually relevant a year from now? I'll get into that a bit later. So I'm going to talk about 3 case studies, so three incidents. These are real events. So as I mentioned, I'm pretty sure I removed all the identifiable information from here. We'll see. But yeah, so this first one, this happened about 2 years ago, in June of 2023. It was a Black Cat ransomware, so Alpha V Black Cat ransomware, and there's a lovely ransom note, fairly stock standard type of attack. We established the timeline of the events of when they got into the system, what new security tools were deployed, and we tried to sort of just build up a timeline for the client during the investigation. So I'm going to go through some of the things that we observed during the attack. So the initial alert was raised at 20 minutes to 1 on June 29th, 2023. The SOC operators, they informed us that there was impossible travel event was observed. So I see I made a mistake here. It wasn't failed login, it was successful logins. So a specific user, they were logging into the company's VPN from various countries throughout the world within mere minutes or seconds from each other. This is known as the impossible travels, because as fast as you want to be, you can't easily log in from various countries at the same time. So this was raised as an alert. They tried to, the SOC team contacted the networking team tried to just see if they can limit this, and they were trying to figure this out. Again, this was like 1 o'clock in the morning, so the response wasn't the greatest, but eventually they could figure out, okay, cool. And they needed to block this. But at that time, that user already had access. I mean, they only realized when he logged in multiple times from impossible locations. So he was logging into the system a couple of hours before this alert was even raised already. And they realized that this was a local VPN account that was being used by the attacker. So it wasn't anything that was managed by their Active Directory. And eventually they figured out that this specific account belonged to one of their service providers' contract workers. It was a contract worker. He needed to do something just quickly on the firewall, so they quickly gave him VPN access. It was meant to be a weekend task. This contractor has long since resigned from the company that he did this specific patch on, and nobody ever knew that this local VPN access account was there. This account also had very high privileges, and it was never monitored. It was never enrolled in two-factor authentication. There was no AD logs of it, nothing. So what the attacker then eventually did is they used this access and they snooped around in the network, and up to the point where they found the service provider's VMware ESXi server. So this VMware server, it would host all the VMs of all the critical systems. And they decided, we're just going to encrypt this. So they used Alpha Black Cat ransomware 2.0 things. So that's the specific variant of it. Yeah, so that's what they used to encrypt it. And the SOC team, their first alert of this was when suddenly they received no more telemetry from any of the EDRs or any of the systems, because now suddenly they have lots of measurements on the servers, but on the EXI server that was hosting them all, they have no telemetry. So they just suddenly saw their SIM is getting 0 logs from anything, suddenly. And then about just after 1 o'clock, we got called and lots of fun. And then we got involved. So we tried to now investigate what happened. And we realized, okay, this was this unmanaged account that had a very high privileges. And we realized that the client, they didn't have any monitoring on their, they had EDR deployed all throughout their estate. So EDR was there, they were monitoring things. But their specific EDR vendor was not supported by the VMware. So VMware, yeah, so you need to do very specific things to actually monitor EDR type logs in that, or you can write your own sensor. That tends to work a bit easier. Because ESXi has a proprietary OS, so there's a lot of like EDRs that don't necessarily work on it. So one of the good things about this company is they were very good at data recovery. So they were able to, within 2 or 3 days, recover all the servers. They had good backups of everything. They had tested their backups, so everything worked quite well. The reason this worked quite well is because they got breached about 6 months prior, pretty much the same type of attack, but they learned from their previous mistakes and they could recover quickly. So the company, what they did is they started a process of going through all endpoints, trying to find is there any local accounts that aren't bound to the Active Directory, and they created a standard operations procedure document which everyone had to sign. Contractors had to sign whenever they created new things. They created procedures to stop anyone from creating new accounts like this. They also deployed a lot of new networking because, as I mentioned, suddenly when you have a breach, funding just becomes available. So they deployed a lot of more networking monitoring tools. And they started ingesting network monitoring traffic, not just from the, previously they only had the 40 VPN, they had their access logs being pushed to the SIM. They didn't track any network activity internal to the network, anything like that. So they started monitoring additional stuff. So that, again, once you get a breach, you get funding. Lovely. So they started monitoring. So those were some of the corrective steps that they did. And luckily, because they had such good backup processes, we could recover them fairly quick. Or, well, they could recover themselves fairly quickly. We tend to not get involved with recovery. Someone else's problem. So that was case number 1. So now we've got another ransomware case. This was an attempted ransomware because it worked / didn't work, depending on if you restarted your machine. But I'll get into that right now. So again, this was an alert that came into the SOC. This was in June of this year, so fairly recently. I intentionally left some of the pieces of evidence for this specific case vague or not included because some of it is still under investigation, stuff like that. So yeah. But anyway, so users noticed that they were receiving a ransomware note on their desktop, but their machine was still accessible. Their machine wasn't encrypted. They couldn't understand why, but they got a ransomware note. So a lot of users just ignored it. But eventually someone said, hey, SOC, something's probably wrong here. Why are we getting a ransomware note and we can still access things? So eventually through the log analysis, they could figure out, okay, so there was a suspicious WMIC process that was copying this ransomware note, and the process was initiated by the DC01 server. So that's the domain controller server, pushing out ransomware notes, which is not something that a domain controller is usually known for doing. Yeah. So eventually okay. This was there's no IPs on here that is, okay. This is fine. Yeah, so we eventually, we were able to get some of the logs because, again, this company, they had EDR, they had a lot of tools, and we could actually see the exact attack pattern. We could see the commands run. I removed a couple of these because they actually directly point to who it was that got breached. But basically what it did is, again, WMIC, and they disable a bunch of notifications, they block some of the EDR tooling, and anyone that got infected then started pushing out this ransomware notes, the readme.txt that you see at the bottom. And after it did all of that, it would install just install BitLocker basically. So in some of the previous steps, it would get the key from the BitLocker. So the attacker would know what the key is, you wouldn't know what the key is. So basically, they did you a favor, they installed BitLocker for you, they just didn't tell you what the key is. So yeah, so that's what they did. Yeah, so that was lots of fun. So now it's like, how did this happen? I mean, we've got EDR installed, there's things monitoring. How did DC01 start doing this? How did DC01 get infected? Why did the EDR not pick it up? The specific client, they had network traffic monitoring, but it wasn't logged. So we needed to investigate. We needed to sort of try and piece together all these different disjoint breadcrumbs. This is what went wrong. The client was in the process of changing out one EDR vendor for another. They had no clear logs of which endpoints had the EDR installed and which ones didn't. Also, the specific client, they work within the mining sector. So a lot of their systems, they would have a laptop, it would be there for observation purposes, and it would be locked in a cabinet for 6 months So it's not uncommon for the EDR management system to not see it checking in for 6 months, 7 months. There was no monitoring of this, and there was no correlation, no collaboration between both EDR vendors, because obviously they're competitors. Oh, we've disabled this EDR, you can now install this EDR. It was sort of a hodgepodge. We now remove one, we now install one. We also noticed that the company, they were in the process of enforcing BitLocker on all servers. So it was a known policy that they wanted to roll out. And previously, one of the SOC analysts, they saw the script, they said, oh no, the company's rolling this out, and they whitelisted it. They said, oh, cool. You're doing BitLocker, we expect to do BitLocker. It would be weird for the company to do BitLocker installs in the middle of the night, but SOC analysts went, yep. They said they're doing this, we saw it coming, happened. Okay, so this was one of the many problems. And then one of the big problems we had at the point is because we had very limited data, because there was not all the systems had EDR, we could sort of partially piece together how the individual moved throughout the network, because we would see secondary logs from other EDR. So as some devices that didn't have EDR installed, if they were used to scan devices that had EDR, we could sort of trace back via those logs and sort of try and piece together how it all came together. The problem is the initial machine that we found to be the sort of the main culprit, it was stuck at the bottom of a mine shaft, and by the time we got to it, it had BitLocker on. so we this happened about the 10th of June last month, and during that long weekend, the weekend of the 16th, all mine workers went home. So we had to wait till Monday for someone to be willing to go down to the shaft to actually go get this laptop. And obviously by that time, patient zero was no more. And we now sat with the problem like, cool, we found the earliest known victim. We don't know if it's patient zero, but this is as far back as we have any evidence of someone attacking. This specific endpoint, it hasn't connected into the EDR management system since last year, approximately November. So we had limited. Currently, that specific laptop, it's going in for forensics, and there's a bunch of other legal processes around that. So I'm not going to go into that right now. So I'm just going to talk about what we managed to determine so far. So from some of the firewall logs that we were able to obtain, we realized, oh, the attacker, they connected in via VPN, again via using unmanaged local admin credentials. There was no two-factor authentication on those things. Nobody knew about it. They exploited weaknesses in some of the unpatched workstations because a lot of these workstations don't connect to the internet often. They are several patch versions behind. So we could see from how the attack spread is that they would specifically target specific vulnerabilities in those boxes. And because they weren't patched, because they weren't connected to the internet fairly often, that's how the lateral movement occurred. And we realized that from that specific laptop that was down in the mine shaft, that's where they were able to get the DC admin access. And from there, they could get to the DC01, and from there, they could spread this LMIC. But, plot twist, case study number 1, case study number 2, same company. So again, if you remember the first time, they also had the problem with the VPN with unmanaged accounts. So they had corrective controls that were deployed after the first case, the first time it happened. But after 2 years of, okay, things are fine now, we can go on as we are, it just got recompromised. A completely different attack pattern, completely different targets that they were no longer targeting the EXI server specifically. It wasn't the specific ransomware strain. But they got breached in pretty much the same way 2 years later. This is the one I added this morning because I thought it was just funny. Let's add this one in. So that shows you. So it's good to have the post-incident actions, but then you must actually make sure that those actions are actually maintained and that they are actually observed. One of the things we also noticed is that we started getting into the firewall logs after the first incident, but the vendors changed the way that they log their, basically the data structure of their logs changed. And that broke a lot of the analysis or the analysis team's queries. The analysis team never picked that up. So we could never see that lateral movement because the queries were still running off outdated data structures, data that we weren't getting in. We were still getting in data, so all the things that checked, are we getting data in from the data sources, were still working. We were just not getting the right data in, which meant our queries weren't working. And we had a false sense of security. Well, not we, but the people that were running this. They had a false sense of security about, like, what are their exposures. So I'll also discuss quickly just the third case study. So this one is not the same as the first two, so it's not always the same company, but this is specifically related to mass phishing. So this is also something that happened slightly earlier in the year. I think the first instance we saw of this was the 3rd of June. And this was the most obvious of obvious phishing campaigns in the world. So whenever someone clicked on so they got a very suspicious email. I'm not going to put the text here because there's a lot of identifiers in the actual email. But then they got told, click here, your company has very important details to share with you. And they get shown this very basic document information for telco, for example. So that this would target multiple companies. So they would say claim from Telkom, from SARS, they were mostly South African companies, but yeah. And if you click on it, you got given a lovely GoFish link. It is not even trying to hide it. It is as obvious as humanly possible. But the way that they actually managed to spread this is that the first person that clicked on it, they would then log into that person's email account after the person put in their credentials, and they would create a email forwarding rule for all their business contacts and all their contacts in the address book. So the next person, they would receive a seemingly legitimate email from someone that they most likely contacted in the past, because if they're in your address book, you probably know them. It passes through all the security checks because it's coming from someone that passes all their DMARC and all their little security checks because it's coming from legitimate email. And it's someone that you've communicated to before, so it's not a new communication channel that might not have been, because some security tools, they might warn you, okay, you've never contacted this guy, why are you contacting him now? So this is how it sort of spread. In this specific case, one of the people that clicked on it, we saw that they attempted to send it to over 3,000 people in their address book. Luckily, Microsoft is not completely useless. It stopped it after 400. So Microsoft doesn't allow you to send so many spam emails at once. It's sort of, after 400 goes, well, maybe we'll wait. So that was at least some good news. But so I say the first instance we saw of this was about the 3rd of June, but throughout the start of June, we saw about 3 or 4 different companies all contacting about this specific thing that happened. So multiple companies got hit by this, multiple companies at different seniority levels basically got hit. And we saw a couple of this now. Again, I'm not going to put too much detail on because, yeah, it's a fairly recent, fairly active thing here. And what this led to is that now people sort of get fatigued because we're getting so many alerts. You don't know if it's real. You don't know if it's active. The tier 1 guys were so afraid of missing anything because one company got breached 57 times the same company over, well, a spread of about 9 days. So the tier 1 analysts, they got to the point where if they see any email forwarding rule, they'll immediately flag an alert, say, listen. And at some point, everyone just started getting this fatigue of like, you've cried wolf too many times, nobody wants to respond to it anymore. And this is one of the previous speakers also mentioned this, is where you start ignoring potentially really serious attacks because you are so overwhelmed with very basic things. One of the alerts we got, I think on Monday, was literally the person set a forwarding rule for their own internet provider, but the person that did that for them, their surname has the word pay in it. So because there's an email rule that was set up, the word pay is in it, it was just, so this sort of highlights some of where you need to customize your rules. You need to make sure that your rules aren't just flagging on anything. And like I said, like the tier 1 analyst, it's not completely their fault. They also got so afraid that they might miss something that is actually critical, they would rather just forward it to us. So I'm running short. Okay, so I'm going to speed run through some of the stuff. So common pitfalls that occur is lack of logging. So what we saw with the EXI server, they weren't logging the EXI server they killed. They were logging all the other endpoints through EDR, but they weren't actually properly logging what was happening on the EXI. So they only realized when all the other servers got taken down. Communication issues, as I mentioned, if people don't get assigned specific roles, they might not actually action it. It becomes the bystander effect. Another issue is people become over-reliant on tools. So people were so used to that, oh no, the EDR will pick this up, or the networking tool. They never check, does the EDR do what it's supposed to do? Is there anything whitelisted on the EDR that shouldn't be? Another common thing is that there's no practicing of the IR plan. Oftentimes the IR plan is seen as an auditing exercise, but it never actually gets followed through upon. So if you're an individual and you want to get involved with this type of stuff, how I got started was I like playing with command line tools. So I got used to log analysis through grep and awk and sed and word count. And there's so many useful basic utilities in Linux that you can just use for these type of things. And that can teach you. If you're more of a Windows person, I'm clearly not. You can use some of the security event logging tools. But TryAcme, they have some very awesome new tools that they've released in the last month or so. They've got a tool for SOC simulator. So if you want to get into the SOC environment, if you want to do tabletop exercises, CSR SOC simulator is fairly good for that. If you want to know how an EDR works, but you can't afford your own EDR, there's a couple of free options available. So my first EDR that I really got used to is Velociraptor. It's not a full-fledged, but you can do the basics with it. It can teach you the basic principles of incident response. Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, I ran out of time. Sorry. Yeah, any questions? Oh, sorry, I can't see a thing.
One question with regards to the large-scale phishing attack
Yeah.
there. You did say that the attacker was able to compromise a user's email account to then obviously accommodate for the forwarding of the payload. Was this done through the credentials used, being there was other vulnerabilities present, such as the lack of multi-factor authentication on that? Or was it through like capturing session identifiers and relaying those to, I guess, hijack that session?
Okay, so with the first couple of incidences we detected, like I said, it was about a 9-day period. The first couple of them completely relied on there not being multi-factor authentication. So the first couple of ones got compromised by not having multi-factor authentication. Then I think by day 5 or so, we started seeing that there was actually mechanism that they were starting to deploy to either ask them to enter their two-factor authentication in exactly the same very dodgy website that you saw earlier. They would prompt there to say, listen, please enter your two-factor. And they got your two-factor authentication via that. Yeah, so it started off very basic, and then it got more complicated as the incidents went on. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so once the attacker had VPN access again, so this is as far as we can ascertain with the evidence that we currently have, is that laptop gets switched on from time to time because they do some meteorological they test the soil, and I can't remember the correct word for it. Whatever. So what that attacker was doing, they were using their VPN access and just scanning that network constantly, and they were looking for vulnerable machines. And as they got onto certain vulnerable machines, they would see, where else does this machine have access to? And that specific laptop, at some point, someone of high privileges was logged into there, and they could use Mimikatz to basically, as far as we can basically understand, based on how we saw the other attacks or the other lateral movement worked. So we suspect that is how they moved from there to the DC, but we don't have exact evidence because, unfortunately, that machine was encrypted at the time. But yeah, so the attacker would use the VPN to scan for vulnerable machines, pivot to one machine. If it can't get any useful credential, to pivot to another machine. Researchers will try and find where's a useful machine for it to actually eventually get access to. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes, yeah. No. Oftentimes we have no idea how they got in. So it becomes a complete investigation. So we involve a lot of forensic teams also to assist us with this, especially in the cases of ransomware, because a lot of your raw evidence gets lost. So we've got a couple of techniques to try and pinpoint to as close to patient zero as we can. But there has been cases where this is as far back as we can go. We don't know. In those cases, we try and do as best monitoring. We sort of update the EDR to look for specific patterns that we observed or how the person spread. Try and see if we can see how they leverage their initial access. If we have no evidence of how they got their initial access, at least we can see, cool, this is their TTPs when they actually try and spread to other systems. So we basically make rules for that. Okay. Yep. You have a question?
Yes, my question was a follow-up to
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So you mentioned that there was like they got access to this laptop that didn't have internet access, and they managed to, I guess, dump credentials and also let you move. So in order like to actually get access and dump credentials, you already have to have previous credentials. So did they manage to exploit something that allowed them to pick us from the machine, or they had already compromised an account?
So again, so based on the evidence we have so far, is they could use a vulnerability that was on there to get remote code execution on that box. Because that was the sort of the vulnerabilities that they were looking for. So all the vulnerability scans, all the specific attacks they did with other machines that they were able to pivot onto, we could see that they were mostly looking for anything that could allow them any form of code execution. And from two of the systems that we could see that once they got code execution, they would run Mimikatz and they would do stuff to try and get any additional credentials. So we suspect that is how they got further. Again, we don't have any evidence, but that is how we suspect that they got there. Okay. Happinesses. Okay, thanks guys.